So with last year's events with, you know, the world ending and shit, the Formula 1 calendar went from your usual affair of races to an entirely jumbled up bundle of goodness, which included a return to a few tracks, and the debut of one which was long overdue. But getting back to the ones that returned, one of those circuits was the Nürburgring in Germany. It was the first time a Grand Prix had been held there since 2013, and it was grouse. But at some point during the weekend, I had a thought. Could Formula 1 ever return to the Nordschleife? Nah, no way. Immediately after thinking that, I tossed it away in acknowledgement that that sort of thing would never, ever happen. Why, you may ask? Well, put simply, it is freaking impossible. In every slight. Or is it? And I'm sure there are some people out there who would have clicked on this video who will be wondering, why is this impossible? Well, let me give you the skinny on the whole deal. Everybody gather round and listen to my song. So the Nürburgring is based in the Eiffel mountain range in Germany. And while yes, this circuit did host a Grand Prix last year, this track isn't the one we're talking about. Well, part of it is, but the vast majority of it looks like this. 13 miles of history, of madness, of pure driving pornography. There are 154 corners on this thing, although when joined with the GP track, it balloons to 170 corners, with a total circuit length reaching nearly 16 miles. But Formula 1 on this thing? Yeah, I need a smart guy with some good editing skills to help preach some history here.
The thoughts of a Formula 1 car racing around this track is just ludicrous, but there is some history with this venue. Starting off in 1925 when Gustav Eiffel and his team were tasked to create a dedicated racetrack. As at the time in Germany there was a popular racing series called Eiffelrennen, and up till this point they were racing but on public roads and needed a dedicated track. So after 2 years of construction from 3,000 workers, on the 18th of June 1927 the Nordschleife was officially opened. And as a nod to previous motor racing events held on public roads, the track would open up to the public to drive on the weekends and in the evenings, something which the track still offers up today. However, you got to remember, back in those days, not a lot of people actually had cars. We then skip to 1940, where the track had to close down due to the Second World War, where a load of the local hotels had to be converted into housing or into hospitals, and as you can imagine, the track actually was damaged quite heavily by this. Not by bombs or anything, but primarily tanks driving over it. After the track was repaired and reopened in 1947, 4 years later it then played host to its first Formula 1 race in 1951, utilising the full 14-mile track. The championship would then race there on and off until 1976, where the now infamous crash involving Niki Lauda forced the championship to move locations to the Hockenheim Ring, and the circuit being left to create an alternative. And it's reasons like this why the Nordschleife was given its nickname the Green Hell by Jackie Stewart, where you're racing on overly powerful cars on an old outdated track which was built by hand, where the safety regulations then were just not good enough. But luckily the Nürburgring would then create a more modern GP circuit in 1984, which is where most of its racing now occurs.
Welcome for the first time since 1976 to the glorious Eiffel Mountains, to the new Nürburgring.
So now you're all caught up with its brief history. Josh, back to you. Best of luck.
Luck? Yeah, nah, man. This place has got checkered history and I'm trying to make a case for it. I love making life difficult for myself. Back on point. The Nordschleife remains a popular venue to this day. And actually, a Formula 1 car did make a trek around the track back in 2007 with Nick Heidfeld and 2012 with Michael Schumacher. Albeit they were only demonstrations, so they weren't going full bore. It's still used today for GT racing, as well as the World Touring Car Cup. Wait, hold on. Time out. If the World Touring Cars are racing there, and if Formula 1 is meant to house the best drivers in the world if you ignore half of them, why not put them on the longest, toughest, hardest racing track in the world? It can't be that hard, right? Well, actually yes, it can be. See, I'll turn attention now to Appendix O to the International Sporting Code. Now, the thing you need to know about this document is that it is extremely boring, but ultimately, it is the Bible for which all circuits must abide by if they wish to attain certain licenses for competition. In basic English, the grade your circuit gets determines what level of racing competition you can host on the circuit. Graded 1 to 6, what they're given is based on the suitability of the circuit to different types of cars and competitions. The Nordschleife is FIA Grade 3, and immediately that's a problem, because while it can host some series like the World Touring Car Championship, the only circuits that can host Formula 1 races require Grade 1 certification. And while the more permanent facility that hosted the Eiffel Grand Prix last year does have that, when you combine the two circuits, the Grade 3 certification will immediately put a stop to any suggestion of returning to the venue. Okay then, well let's get the track up to Grade 1 then, huh? No big deal. Okay. Time for a little reality check. The good news is that the facilities such as the medical center and adequate pit facilities and grandstands and blah 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 blah, that's already there on the Grand Prix circuit. So the focus will be on the Nordschleife section of the track. So the first order of business when it comes to upgrading this thing to grade 1 is the track surface. For a few reasons, all 13 miles of this beast would need to be resurfaced. These all have to do with safety, with one of the reasons being that under section 10, no form of advertising or decoration is permitted on the track surface. Why is this significant? Well, the whole damn track looks like a 3-year-old's wall. Avoiding the painted dicks on the racing line in the wet is gonna be tricky, and you may want to consider widening the track in a couple of areas, considering that some parts of the track are only 6 meters wide. Now, the cost associated with this does vary, but when all is said and done, you would be looking at roughly 30 million euros to resurface this whole track, and the cost could potentially be even greater. But of course, that's just the resurfacing part. Before you get into that, however, you have to look at reprofiling large portions of the track to improve safety. This includes bigger runoff areas, introducing large portions of tarmac, and adequate service areas so that the cars can be ferried off safely whenever a crash happens. Now, the curbs are definitely going to be in need of replacing, but considering how many of them are around the circuit, that is no small job. Lengthening the runoff areas in some areas will require significant groundworks, and if gravel is going to be a theme at this track, some of it will have to be outsourced from Michael Madsen's voice box to cope with the volume.
There's somebody in this world that's more hardcore than me. Is your mom.
How would this look? Well, here's one example at Nürburgring. Once you've extended the runoff areas, resurfaced the track, reprofiled the curbs, and moved some earth around, you end up with this. This kind of stuff would be applicable to the whole track. Oh yeah, and not to mention that places like the approach to Flugplatz, a chicane would probably have to be added to stop drivers from, you know, flying to their deaths and shit. Other sections may need to be reprofiled entirely, with new designs to the corners and new corners altogether. The possibilities are endless when you're talking about 13 miles of racetrack, but the safety of this track does need to be improved if they're going to get Formula 1 cars here. The argument of they're racing drivers, they know the risks, is easy to say when it's not your life at risk. But even if they did up the safety, do you really want to see this? Personally, no. What will we get out of having a race on the Nordschleife? The history of the circuit is preserved in its current state. I know the track gets resurfaced every so often on certain parts of it, but the characteristics of the track remain unchanged. To this day, it remains one of the most challenging and revered circuits around the world. Tourists can still drive around it today, and the automotive industry continues to use it as a testing ground for all their new models. Changing it to get a Formula 1 race on there would likely destroy all of that. And for what? A 12-lap race around a butchered circuit just for the spectacle? And then we gotta consider the cost. How much would that be? And would the racing even be any good after all of that? Nah. Not worth it. We do not need to turn the Nordschleife into the Nordscheiße. But hey, if there is one change that should, nay, must be made to the circuit, it's naming a corner after the recently departed Sabine Schmitz. To the people of the Nürburgring, make it happen. Anyways, thank you all for watching. Drop a comment below, subscribe to the channel if you're awesome, and always remember, keep it respectful, be wholesome, don't be a manus, and as always, I'll see you all later.
Everybody gather round and listen to my song. I've only got one. Everybody gather round and listen to my song.